thanks again to the Commission for their initiative and availability to do this workshop. And I would first like to introduce to you then Dovile Vaigauskaite. My apologies for the pronunciation. Policy Officer at the Commission on the unit dealing with, among others, the EU Recovery and Resilience Facility. So please, Dovile, the floor is yours.
Thank you. And first of all, thank you so much for giving the opportunity for me to come and speak to so many people from so many different countries. And I was asked today to present the Recovery and Resilience Facility and what can it do for the justice systems, obviously, as this is your topic. And I have some slides. And before I start, I just wanted to also say that, of course, the event was facilitated by our colleagues from DG Justice, and I come from a Secretary General Task Force on the Recovery and Resilience, which is another department of the Commission, but I am also accompanied by a colleague, Andrea Tiquero, who follows digital aspects, so she'll be available also together with me to answer any of your questions after the presentation. So actually, to start with, the personal remark is that tomorrow is going to be exactly a year when I was sent from my office to be in quarantine because one of my colleagues was diagnosed with COVID. And I was luckily one of the 20 people who attended the meeting with him. So that's my personal experience with the pandemic started. And it's difficult to believe that it's already 1 year. But here we are. But on the other hand, I think this experience for everyone was also about discovering silver linings in that there is nothing, there's always some good in something bad, as we like to say in my country. And why am I telling you this? Because I think the Recovery and Resilience Facility is kind of a silver lining in a way, because it started as a response to crisis, but now it is serving to advance the EU's priorities that were identified at the beginning of this Commission's mandate. So, so there's nothing bad that doesn't have certain good in it. So today I will talk about the facility, what it is, and how does it function. And then I will also quickly touch upon, so what can it do for the justice systems and the justice systems reforms? After me, there will be another intervention by a colleague from DG Justice who will talk about more digital aspects of the justice system. So I will try not to preempt his presentation. I will not go too much into detail on that aspect. So let's start. What is the facility, or as we call within the Commission, the RRF? So a year ago, we were all faced with a crisis that came out of nowhere, and suddenly the Commission and the national authorities were faced with a crisis management. So it was a reaction to the crisis, and there were lots of measures adopted starting from March last year. How do we cope with all the implications of the crisis? So there were lots of measures being adopted. I'm not going to go through them, but it's a big monetary-wise response to the crisis. Now we are entering now another phase of dealing with the crisis, is how do we recover from the crisis? And this is where the RRF comes into play. And the RRF is part of bigger response from the EU to the crisis, which is so-called Next Generation EU. If you have ever been in Brussels in the past months, well, it's a bit complicated with a non-essential travel ban, but there is a big banner on the Berlaymont building already for a while saying Next Generation EU. So this is like a slogan for presenting what is the EU doing to recover from this crisis. And this is where the RRF also comes into play, because it is part of this Next Generation EU package. So The Next Generation EU will function together alongside the multi-annual financial framework on which the agreement was reached last year, and both together will serve for the coming years to take the EU out of this economic and social crisis. And the centerpiece of the Next Generation EU is the Recovery and Resilience Facility. So what is it, the RRF? The RRF is a big envelope of money, and it is really big since it's 672 billion euros altogether, that will be made available to the member states for the coming 5-year period to adopt measures to address the issues that were caused by the crisis. Now, an important element to note is that not all the member states will get the same amount allocated from the RRF. Those that were affected the most, member states, will get a bigger chunk of money. And that is not depending on the Commission. It will not the Commission who will decide how much each member state should get. It was established in the regulation that came into force very recently on the 19th of February that established the facility. So the work had already started on a political level and on administrative level to prepare the facility, but formally it came only into force a few weeks ago when the regulation was finally, when it has finally entered into force. Now, what makes it different from the other funds? And quite often in our dealings with the member states and stakeholders, we see that the RRF is quite often confused with the cohesion funding. Here, there is a big difference in that this facility is a performance-based facility. So it will be made available, the payments will be made periodically on the basis of achieving the results. Now, what kind of results are we talking about? So apart from the objectives of the facility that you can see in a bracketed box, which is promoting the cohesion, strengthening the resilience, mitigating the social and economic impact of the crisis, and supporting the green and digital transitions, this is also another important element that distinguishes the RRF from other funds is that it's not only investments, but also reforms. And it has to be a balanced a package of reforms and investments to address the challenges that have been identified for the particular member state with semester context. So there's a very close link with the European semester. And another important element that distinguishes the RRF from other funds is that we have expenditure targets. We have the so-called green expenditure target, which says that all the expenditure that is foreseen by the member state under the RRF have to comprise 37%. And we also have a digital target that says that those measures that are proposed by the member states have to reach the 20% of the member states' expenditure under the RRF. So these are important elements to bear in mind as we will talk about it a bit later. There are also certain areas that have been identified by the Commission as the common challenges faced by all member states. So not only those identified in the European semester for particular member states, but there are the areas that we should all work together to address. And they are 7. But maybe the one that is most relevant for the justice systems is the one that's called Modernize, which calls for the digitalization of public administrations. That would also include the justice systems. And another one, which is Reskill and Upskill, which calls for education and training to support digital skills. So that's not only for the citizens, but also for the professionals. But obviously, we would need to have both if we want to move towards more digitalization. Now, very quickly, in the regulation, what it says is that the facility has 6 policy pillars. As I mentioned before already, so obviously there's a green transition pillar, there's a digital transformation, the resilience and health, sustainable and smart growth. All these 6 pillars mean that when the member states come up with a set of measures under the RRF, they have to make sure that there are measures under each of these 6 pillars. So they have to contain measures that address each of them. Now, to maybe tell you how does this facility work and how we're going to put this all in practice. So as I mentioned, there is a regulation that establishes objectives of the facility, the financial allocations for each member state, but also the process of how the money will be distributed. Now, as I said, important thing to bear in mind is that the RRF has a relatively short time span. Obviously, it is meant to deal with the effects of the crisis, which requires action now, not later, not in 10 years. So the measures that are included in the National Recovery and Resilience Plans, and these will be the plans which will contain all the measures that the member states want to be financed under the RRF. These measures have to be implemented by 2026. So the last payment that can be made from the Commission to the member state can be only done in August 2026. So it means that the recommendation is that the measures that member states propose have to be relatively mature projects already, so that they are ready to be implemented the moment the plans are approved. So how those plans come into being and how do they become something formal? So within the Commission, we have an established task force. This is where I come from, that is responsible for steering this process together with our colleagues from DG ECFIN. And we are engaging on an informal basis already since August with all the member states to identify what kind of measures they could include into their national plans that would address properly the country-specific recommendations, as well as for them to meet the digital and green targets. Now, when the member states are ready, so they have filled all the elements that have to be there in their plans, they came up with the good mix of measures, they put it down in the recovery and resilience plan. Then, when they're ready to submit it, which the regulation says that those plans should be submitted by 30th of April this year, although it says as a general rule, which means it's not a very strict deadline, but obviously for the member states, the sooner they submit the plans, the sooner they get approved, the sooner they will get the distribution of funds. So once they submit formally those plans, the Commission has 2 months to assess those plans. Then on the basis of that assessment, the Commission prepares an implementing council decision that would go then to the council, and it has to be approved by the council to become a law and to become a formal approved plan. Now, the council can suspend the adoption or payments in case there is a significant non-compliance. And the payments will be done to the member states on the basis of the agreed payment schedule, which will be together with the milestones and targets. So as I mentioned at the beginning, that this is a performance-based instrument. So milestones and targets are those elements that are very important for payments, because the payments from the RRF can only be made once those milestones and targets are attained. So this will be very important when we discuss the payment schedule, because the member states will have to put, okay, by 2022 August, I will attain this particular milestone, and then a certain amount of the RRF will be disbursed to that member state. The member states will have to report on the progress twice a year to the Commission. And the Commission from its side will also have to report to the Parliament and the Council on the implementation of the facility. So just to sum up, the RRF is there to help member states address the challenges identified in the European semester and to advance on green and digital transition. It has to be a coherent package of reforms and public investments. We've seen so far that there has been a lot of investments proposed, but less so of reforms. So this is an important element to bear in mind, that it has to be a balanced approach. So if there is a challenge identified for a particular member state about a justice system, just buying video conferencing equipment might not necessarily address that challenge. It's a performance-based tool, so we will only look at the attainment of the objectives, so the attainment of the milestones and targets. We will not look at how much was spent and then reimburse those costs. This is a different approach than cohesion policy. What is very important is that because it's so short span and so important, that the stakeholders are involved as you in the preparation of the national plans and also in the implementation. This has to be also described in the plans. It's an important element. Another important element is the complementarity. So obviously there are some projects or measures that are being financed from different sources. So it's important to ensure that there is no overlap in funding, and that if there is some complementarity, that we achieve the synergy. So we are not doing for the same project from different funds, and that we attain the best result possible. State aid compliance is still is an obligation as well. So the funding given by the member states through the RRF would still be subject to the state aid verification. And lastly, but not less important, is the audit and controls. Obviously, we want the money to be used in a right way. So strong controls and strong audit mechanism must be installed by the member states, or use the same mechanism could be used, for example, from the cohesion funding as well. Now, coming to the point that's probably more interesting for you as stakeholders of the justice systems, what can RRF do for the justice systems? When we talk about the justice systems, there are two elements of relevance. So for example, there is a number of member states for which there were country-specific recommendations addressed in 2019 and 2020 linked to justice systems. So for those member states, obviously, having a reform and investments to address those challenges in the justice system will be important. And this is something that we will also look at. There have been, just to give you an example, there are like 16 member states for which challenges linked to the justice systems have been identified. So it's not all 27, but it's a majority of member states. So this will be an important element. Another element that is relevant for the justice systems is the digital transition. So apart from addressing the CSRs, member states also have to reach the digital target. So the 20% of spending, which actually translates into 134 billion of euros. So it's a significant amount of money. So digitalization of public administration, as I mentioned before, is one of the flagship initiatives as well. So one of the 7, and it could also translate into the digitalization of judicial procedures. Now, for example, there's also a component, a draft component that we have published in autumn this year to help member states to understand what kind of reforms and what kind of investments they could propose with regard to the digitalization of public administration. So there is a component that is published on the RRF website, and I can share it later on in the chat, that also explains what kind of measures, for example, the member states could envisage in relation to the justice systems. So, for example, member state could envisage investments that would accelerate the digitalization of judicial procedures, focusing on the handling of cases by the judicial institutions, the exchange of information and documents with the parties and lawyers, the continued and easy access to justice for all, the interoperability of different systems developed at national level. These are just some examples of possible measures to be included. Now, this of course will depend on the national context, on the challenges identified for that member state, or the member state's priorities identified for the digital transition. Another possible area of measures could be the cross-border initiative, also in the judicial area, where member states cooperate on a voluntary basis to, for example, set up for the e-evidence digital exchange system. But I will not go into too many details, as I know that my colleague from DG Justice after me will talk about this more, and he's definitely a better expert in that. It's just that what I wanted to add on the digital transition is that during the crisis, we noticed that in some member states, the justice systems came to a stall because of the restrictions imposed on the public life. And obviously, we shouldn't repeat this because having effective justice systems is important, not only for us as citizens, but also for the business environment. And it will be an important element in the successful recovery from the crisis. So RRF could serve as a good basis to advance such reforms and to push forward such investments. And just to say that, of course, digital solutions will not only serve to reach the digital target, but it will also support the green transition. So they will go hand in hand. So maybe just to wrap up, the RRF is a sort of a silver lining, as I said at the beginning. It started from dealing with something negative, but it turned into something that will help us to push forward the reforms and investments to make the EU a climate neutral continent, and to make it a better continent also when it comes to the justice systems. And I would like to invite you then to share with your ministries and to engage with your ministries what kind of reforms and investments they are envisaging to be included in their national plans. Don't write to me directly, although I'm happy to share my contacts if you ever have any questions, because the way the process has been organized is that to ensure a smooth coordination, each member state has a designated focal point for RRF. In some countries, it's Ministry of Finance. In some, there is a Ministry of European Projects. I don't know about your particular member state, but they are the ones who decide what goes in or not into the national plans. So I would invite you then to liaise with that particular institution in your member state to discuss what kind of justice related reforms should be in there. I thank you very much, and I'm happy to take any questions after